What if I told you that every time you looked in a mirror, you weren't just seeing yourself, but glimpses of your future? And what if that future was filled with nothing but horror? We've all had that unsettling moment standing in front of a bathroom mirror at 3 a.m., feeling like something was watching us from the other side. That primal fear of reflections, of seeing something that shouldn't be there, lurking just beyond the glass. Today's story involves Sarah Chun, a 28-year-old graphic designer from Portland, who thought she'd found the perfect vintage mirror at a weekend yard sale. For just $15, she bought what would become her most terrifying possession, a mirror that didn't reflect the present, but revealed the future. And not just any future, the darkest, most disturbing events that were yet to come. But here's where it gets truly chilling. When Sarah's reflections started showing her own death, she had to ask herself, was she seeing a warning she could change, or a fate that was already sealed? If this opening has already sent chills down your spine, hit that like button, because what you're about to hear will make you question every mirror in your home. The antique mirror Sarah purchased that sunny Saturday morning in June 2023 had an ornate brass frame, tarnished with age, and glass so old it seemed to ripple like water when light hit it just right. The elderly woman selling it claimed it had been in her family for generations, passed down from her great-grandmother who immigrated from Eastern Europe in the 1890s. She seemed almost relieved when Sarah handed over the $15, muttering something about finally finding the right person as she wrapped it carefully in old newspapers. Sarah had no idea that this seemingly innocent purchase would transform her quiet apartment into a window to horrors beyond imagination. She had no way of knowing that the previous owners had all died under mysterious circumstances. And she certainly couldn't have predicted that within weeks, she'd be staring at her own terrified face in that mirror, watching herself die over and over again. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. Sarah Chun lived alone in a converted loft apartment in Portland's Pearl District, the kind of space that looked perfect on Instagram, but felt hollow and cold in real life. As a freelance graphic designer, she spent most of her time staring at screens. So when she discovered the weekend yard sale just 3 blocks from her apartment, it felt like a sign to add some character to her sterile living space. The mirror caught her eye immediately. It stood about 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide, with an intricate brass frame that featured carved roses and thorny vines intertwining around the edges. Despite its age, the craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly handmade by someone who understood that mirrors weren't just functional objects, but portals between worlds. Take a moment to imagine this scene. You're browsing through decades of someone else's memories, and you find an object that seems to call out to you. Have you ever experienced that pull towards something old and mysterious? Let me know in the comments what antique item has fascinated you. The woman selling it was probably in her 80s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that held decades of secrets. When Sarah inquired about the mirror, the woman's demeanor shifted subtly. Her sales pitch became more urgent, almost desperate. "It needs to find the right home," she said, her weathered hands trembling slightly as she ran them along the brass frame. "Someone who can handle what it shows." Sarah laughed off the cryptic comment, assuming it was typical yard sale theatrics designed to make items seem more valuable or mysterious. She was drawn to the mirror's aesthetic beauty, not any supernatural properties. As an artist, she appreciated the craftsmanship and could already envision how it would look in her minimalist apartment. A perfect contrast between old-world elegance and modern simplicity. The transaction was quick. $15 changed hands, and suddenly Sarah was the proud owner of what she assumed was simply a beautiful antique mirror. The elderly woman helped her load it into her Honda Civic, but as Sarah drove away, she noticed in her rearview mirror that the woman remained standing on her lawn, watching the car disappear down the street with an expression that seemed equal parts relief and concern. Back at her apartment, Sarah positioned the mirror in her bedroom, directly across from her bed where it would catch the natural light from her east-facing windows. The placement seemed perfect. She could see herself from head to toe when getting dressed, and the mirror's ornate frame added exactly the vintage charm her modern space had been missing. That first night, as she brushed her teeth before bed, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the new mirror and smiled. She looked good in it. The old glass seemed to soften her features in a flattering way, and the warm tones of the brass frame complemented her olive skin perfectly. She had no idea that this moment of satisfaction would be her last peaceful interaction with the mirror, because starting the very next morning, her reflection would begin showing her things that hadn't happened yet. And as the days progressed, those visions would grow darker, more detailed, and infinitely more terrifying. To understand the true horror of what Sarah experienced, we need to delve into the mirror's dark history, a history that the elderly woman at the yard sale had deliberately omitted from her sales pitch. The mirror was crafted in 1891 by a Romanian artisan named Dumitru Vasile in the small village of Brașov, nestled in the shadows of the Carpathian Mountains. Vasile wasn't just any craftsman. He was known throughout the region as someone who dabbled in the occult, creating functional art that served purposes beyond mere decoration. Local folklore claimed that Vasile had made a pact with dark forces, imbuing his creations with supernatural properties in exchange for worldly success. The brass frame wasn't simply decorative. Those intertwining roses and thorns weren't random artistic choices. They formed specific symbols that, when combined with the particular composition of the glass, created what occultists call a scrying mirror. But unlike traditional scrying mirrors used for divination, Vasile's creation was designed to show not potential futures, but inevitable ones. The mirror didn't reveal possibilities, it revealed certainties. If you're interested in the occult history behind cursed objects, make sure to subscribe because I have an entire series planned on supernatural artifacts and their terrifying origins. The mirror's first owner was a wealthy merchant named Alexander Popov, who commissioned it for his wife as a wedding gift. Within 6 months of its installation in their Moscow mansion, 3 disturbing events occurred. First, Mrs. Popov began suffering from what doctors termed prophetic hysteria. She would stare into the mirror and describe in vivid detail accidents and deaths that would occur in their city days or weeks later. Second, servants reported that the mirror's reflection sometimes showed rooms that didn't exist in the house, filled with people they didn't recognize performing ritualistic activities. Third, and most disturbing, Mrs. Popov began obsessing over a particular vision she saw repeatedly, her own husband's death. On March 15, 1892, exactly as Mrs. Popov had seen in the mirror weeks earlier, Alexander Popov died when his carriage overturned on a snowy Moscow street. The exact circumstances, down to the color of the horse that spooked his team, matched her visions perfectly. Devastated and terrified, Mrs. Popov had the mirror sold immediately to a dealer who specialized in unusual antiquities. The pattern continued through subsequent owners. In 1903, the mirror was owned by a German family in Berlin. The teenage daughter began having visions of uniformed men searching houses and arresting families. Her parents dismissed these as nightmares until years later when the Nazi regime made her visions reality. The family fled Germany in 1934, but not before the mirror had shown the daughter increasingly disturbing scenes of what would eventually be recognized as the Holocaust. By 1938, the mirror had found its way to London, owned by an elderly collector named Edmund Whitmore. Whitmore documented his experiences in a detailed journal that surfaced decades later in estate sales. He wrote about seeing future battles in the sky, descriptions that perfectly matched the London Blitz years before it occurred. His final journal entry, dated September 3, 1940, describes seeing his own death in precise detail. The mirror shows me beneath rubble, my body broken, clutching this very pen. The building collapses at 11:47 p.m. I know because I can see the clock on the wall, stopped at that exact moment. Whitmore died that night when a German bomb destroyed his building. He was found clutching his fountain pen, exactly as he had written. The historical documentation of this mirror's journey is extensive and deeply disturbing. If you want me to cover more cursed objects with verified histories, let me know in the comments which ones intrigue you most. After the war, the mirror disappeared for several decades, only to resurface in a private collection in New York in the 1970s. The collector, Dr. Margaret Thorne, was a psychiatrist who initially purchased it for her office, thinking patients might find the antique mirror aesthetically pleasing. Instead, she discovered that patients sitting across from the mirror began describing detailed visions of future traumatic events. Dr. Thorne documented case after case of patients accurately predicting accidents, deaths, and disasters they had no logical way of knowing about. In 1987, Dr. Thorne donated the mirror to what she termed a more appropriate guardian, the elderly woman whose family had been tasked with keeping dangerous supernatural artifact from causing harm. For 36 years, the mirror sat in storage, covered and contained, until the woman's advanced age and failing health convinced her that it needed a new caretaker. She thought she had found that caretaker in Sarah Chun. She was tragically wrong. Sarah's first glimpse into the mirror's true nature occurred on her third morning of ownership. But like many supernatural experiences, it began so subtly that she initially dismissed it as imagination. She was getting ready for a client meeting, standing before the mirror while applying makeup, when she noticed something odd about her reflection. For just a moment, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, her reflected image appeared to be wearing different clothes. Instead of a navy blue blazer she had chosen for the meeting, her reflection showed her in a black dress, with her hair pulled back in a style she rarely wore. Sarah blinked, shook her head, and looked again. Her reflection now matched reality perfectly. Navy blazer, hair down, morning light streaming through the windows behind her. She laughed at herself, attributing the momentary confusion to being tired and stressed about the upcoming client presentation. But as she gathered her materials for the meeting, a nagging thought persisted. The black dress her reflection had been wearing. She owned that dress, but it was hanging in her closet, unworn for months. And the hairstyle, while foreign to her daily routine, was exactly how she had worn her hair to her grandmother's funeral 2 years earlier. This is the moment where most people would rationalize what they saw, dismiss it as fatigue or imagination. But sometimes, our instincts know better than our logic. Have you ever had a moment where you saw something that shouldn't have been possible? Share your experience in the comments. I read every one. The client meeting went well, and Sarah returned home that evening feeling accomplished and energized. She had landed a significant project redesigning a local restaurant's entire visual identity. Exactly the kind of work that could elevate her career. She celebrated with takeout Thai food and a glass of wine, feeling optimistic about her future for the first time in months. As she got ready for bed, brushing her teeth in the bathroom, she caught sight of herself in the antique mirror through the open doorway. But what she saw made her drop her toothbrush into the sink. Her reflection was crying, not just tearing up, but sobbing, shoulders shaking, mouth contorted in anguish, tears streaming down her cheeks. But Sarah wasn't crying. She was standing perfectly still, toothbrush foam still on her lips, staring in absolute confusion at an image that couldn't possibly be real. She touched her own face, and her reflection's hands moved accordingly. But while her actual cheeks were dry, her reflections were wet with tears. She forced herself to smile, and her reflection smiled too, but it was the kind of broken smile someone gives at a funeral, trying to be strong while their world falls apart. The vision lasted exactly 37 seconds. Sarah knew because she found herself counting, some primitive part of her brain trying to impose logic on an impossible situation. At 37 seconds, her reflection suddenly matched reality again. Confused, frightened, but no longer crying. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the mirror, which now reflected only darkness and the faint outline of her furniture in the moonlight streaming through her windows. Every rational explanation seemed inadequate. Stress hallucinations didn't work that way. Sleep deprivation didn't cause such specific, detailed visions. And the crying hadn't felt like something she was imagining. It felt like something she was witnessing. Around 3 a.m., her phone rang. The call that would make everything clear. "Sarah? It's Tom." Her brother's voice was thick with emotion, strained in a way she'd only heard once before, when they'd received the call about their grandmother's passing. "Tom? What's wrong?" "It's 3 in the morning. It's Dad," he said, and she could hear him struggling to control his breathing. He had a massive heart attack tonight. They don't think he's going to make it through surgery. You need to come home. Now. The phone slipped from Sarah's numb fingers. She stared at the mirror across from her bed, and for one terrifying moment, she could swear she saw her reflection again. Wearing that black dress, hair pulled back into funeral style, tears streaming down her face exactly as they were now streaming down her actual face. The mirror hadn't shown her a random vision. It had shown her exactly what she would look like when she received the worst news of her life. And if it could show her that with such precise accuracy, what other futures was it revealing? Sarah spent the next 18 hours traveling to her childhood home in Denver, sitting vigil in a hospital waiting room that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Her father survived the surgery, but barely. As she sat beside his bed, watching him breathe with the assistance of machines, she found herself thinking obsessively about the mirror. The black dress she had seen in the reflection, she had packed it in her emergency travel bag, along with the hair clips that would pull her hair back in exactly the style the mirror had shown. She had prepared for a funeral without consciously realizing it, following the mirror's preview of her future. Her father would recover, slowly and with significant lifestyle changes, but he would live. The mirror had shown her the emotional reality of that night, but not the outcome. It revealed the pain, but not the resolution. And that realization filled Sarah with a new kind of dread. If the mirror could show her moments of anguish with such accuracy, what other horrors was it preparing to reveal? Upon returning to Portland a week later, Sarah found herself unable to ignore the mirror's presence in her apartment. What had once been a beautiful decorative piece now felt like a malevolent observer, watching her every move with ancient, knowing eyes. She considered covering it, moving it, even selling it. But each time she approached the mirror with these intentions, she found herself frozen by a terrible curiosity. What else would it show her? The second major vision came 4 days after her return. Sarah was working late, her laptop open on her kitchen table, when she caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror's reflection across the room. But her apartment was empty. She lived alone, all windows were closed, and she hadn't moved from her chair in over an hour. She walked slowly toward the mirror, each step feeling like a descent into something she couldn't quite name. As she drew closer, the reflection became clearer. She saw herself, but not as she was in that moment. The Sarah in the mirror was backing away from her front door, terror etched across her face as the door handle turned slowly from the outside. Someone was trying to break in, but as Sarah watched this horrifying scene unfold, she realized she could hear something that her reflection couldn't. Footsteps in the hallway outside her actual apartment. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that stopped directly outside her door. This is where the mirror's true cruelty revealed itself. It wasn't just showing Sarah possible futures. It was showing her immediate threats, giving her just enough warning to experience the full terror of anticipation. The doorknob began to turn. Sarah grabbed the baseball bat she kept beside her bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she approached the door. The mirror's vision was playing out in real time. She watched her reflection raise the bat, position herself to the side of the door, exactly as she was doing in reality. The synchronization was perfect and absolutely terrifying. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of a break-in, she heard a familiar voice. "Sarah? It's Mrs. Martinez from 4B. I'm so sorry to bother you so late, but my cat got out and I thought I heard him in the hallway near your door." Sarah opened the door to find her elderly neighbor, flashlight in hand, looking embarrassed and worried. They spent 20 minutes searching the hallways for Mr. Whiskers, who was eventually found hiding in the building's laundry room. A completely innocent situation, but the mirror had shown Sarah experiencing mortal terror over what turned out to be a harmless visit from her neighbor. Why? What was the purpose of showing her a future filled with fear when the reality was benign? This is when Sarah should have realized that the mirror wasn't trying to help her. It was feeding on her fear. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about objects that harvest human emotions for dark purposes. The third vision was worse. Much worse. 2 nights later, while brushing her teeth before bed, Sarah saw herself in the mirror's reflection lying motionless on her bathroom floor, blood pooling around her head. The vision was so vivid, so detailed, that she could see individual tiles on the floor, the pattern of blood spatter on her white bathroom wall, even the exact position of her hands. She was seeing her own death, and it wasn't going to be an accident. The angle of the blood spatter, the defensive wounds on her reflection's arms, the overturned objects in the bathroom. This was showing her being murdered. Sarah stumbled backward from the mirror, her toothbrush clattering into the sink. But even from across the room, she could still see the reflection. Her own corpse growing cold on the bathroom floor she cleaned every Sunday. The vision lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of staring at her own violent death. Unable to look away, unable to convince herself it wasn't real. When her reflection finally returned to normal, Sarah made a decision that would prove to be either her salvation or her doom. She was going to research everything she could about the mirror's history. She was going to find out who had owned it before, what had happened to them, and most importantly, how to stop the visions. Because if the mirror could show her death with such horrific clarity, she needed to know. Was she looking at an unchangeable fate or a warning she could still act upon? The answer to that question would determine whether she lived or died. Sarah's research consumed her for the next 4 days. She barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination as she dove deep into property records, estate sale documents, and newspaper archives. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Every single previous owner of the mirror had died exactly as the mirror had shown them. The German family's teenage daughter died in a concentration camp, just as her visions had predicted. Edmund Whitmore died beneath rubble at precisely 11:47 p.m. Dr. Margaret Thorne's patients who saw visions in the mirror died exactly as they had described. The mirror wasn't showing possible futures. It was showing absolute certainties. This is the moment of terrible clarity that every horror story builds toward. The moment when the protagonist realizes the full scope of their doom. If this revelation has you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button because the most terrifying part is still coming. On the 5th night of her research, Sarah stood in her bathroom, staring at the mirror, baseball bat in hand. She had made her decision. If she couldn't change what the mirror showed, she could at least change how it happened. She was going to destroy the mirror before the vision could come true. She raised the bat above her head, aiming for the center of the antique glass. But as she prepared to swing, the reflection changed one final time. She saw herself lowering the bat. She saw herself setting it aside. She saw herself walking calmly toward the bathroom counter, picking up her razor blade and cutting deep, purposeful lines across her wrists. She watched herself bleed out peacefully, almost serenely, on the bathroom floor. "No," Sarah whispered to her reflection. "That's not how this ends." But her reflection smiled back at her, a sad, knowing smile. And slowly, inevitably, Sarah found her arms lowering, found herself setting the bat aside, found herself walking toward the counter where her razor lay waiting. The mirror wasn't just showing her death, it was controlling it. Every vision had been orchestrating this moment, building to this final act of supernatural manipulation. The break-in scare, the crying reflection, the preview of her father's heart attack, all of it designed to bring her to this point of desperation and terror. This is the true horror of cursed objects. They don't just predict tragedy, they create it. Sarah's hand moved toward the razor blade against her conscious will. But in that final moment, as her fingers touched the cold metal, she understood something crucial about the mirror's power. It could show the future, it could even influence her actions, but it needed her cooperation. It needed her to believe she had no choice. And Sarah Chun had always been stubborn. Instead of picking up the razor, she grabbed the baseball bat and swung with every ounce of strength she possessed. The mirror exploded into 1,000 pieces, each shard reflecting a different future, a different death, a different horror. As the glass rained down around her, Sarah heard something that sounded almost like screaming, though it might have been just the sound of ancient glass finally breaking. The mirror's destruction marked the end of Sarah's supernatural torment, but not the end of the story. Because objects like this, objects that have fed on fear and death for over a century, don't simply disappear when they're broken. Sarah carefully collected every piece of glass, every fragment of the brass frame, and drove them to the Oregon coast. Standing on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, she scattered the remains into the churning waters below, watching them disappear into the depths where they could never again torment another soul. If you've ever wondered what happens to cursed objects after they're destroyed, make sure you're subscribed, because I'll be covering the aftermath of supernatural encounters in future videos. But here's where the story takes its final, chilling turn. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a call from an antique dealer in Seattle. A fisherman had found fragments of an ornate mirror washed up on a beach north of the city. The dealer, specializing in supernatural artifacts, wanted to know if she'd be interested in selling the pieces for reconstruction. Mirrors like this, he explained, they're practically indestructible. The glass can be recut, the frame can be reforged. There are collectors who pay enormous sums for authentic, scrying mirrors with documented histories. Sarah hung up without answering, but she couldn't stop thinking about his words. Practically indestructible. 3 months later, browsing through estate sales on a Sunday morning, old habits die hard. Sarah spotted a familiar gleam across a crowded yard. There, propped against a folding table laden with kitchen appliances and paperback books, stood a mirror. Not the same mirror, but close enough to make her blood freeze. The brass frame was slightly different, the glass newer, but the carved roses and thorns were identical. The dimensions were perfect, and when she caught sight of her reflection, she could swear she saw herself for just a moment wearing a black dress, tears streaming down her cheeks. Some curses, it seems, are stronger than the objects that contain them. Sarah walked away without looking back, but as she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere behind her, in someone else's yard sale, in someone else's moment of innocent curiosity, the cycle was beginning again. If this story left you questioning every mirror in your house, you're not alone. Drop a comment below sharing your own supernatural encounters. I read every single one, and they often inspire future videos. And if you dare to share this tale of reflective horror with your friends, well, just make sure they're ready for sleepless nights. Don't forget to like this video if it sent chills down your spine. Subscribe for more supernatural horror stories, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a tale of terror. Because in a world full of cursed objects and supernatural encounters, knowledge might just be the only thing standing between you and your own haunted reflection.